I was halfway to the door when her hand appeared, light but deliberate, catching my wrist. A pulse ran through me I hadn't expected. "You're not going anywhere," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper, and somehow it wasn't a command, it was a gravity I couldn't resist. She stood by the window, the late afternoon light catching strands of silver in her hair, casting her face in a soft glow. Graceful. Confident. And yet, in the slightest curve of her shoulders, in the tremor of her fingers as she brushed mine, there was something fragile, something unspoken. I wanted to ask her what it was, but the words stuck somewhere between my chest and my throat. I noticed the way she shifted her weight, the faint scent of jasmine lingering in the room like an invisible thread pulling me closer. Every time she glanced at me, her eyes held something I couldn't name, a knowing, a quiet challenge, a vulnerability masked by control. My hand tingled where hers lingered on mine, though she wasn't even pressing. "I thought you were leaving," I said, trying to sound casual, but my voice cracked slightly. She smiled, not the wide, easy kind, but the slow, intimate one that makes the space between two people feel too small. "I thought so too," she murmured, brushing her fingers along the keys I'd just grabbed from the counter. Her touch was warm, deliberate, and I realized I hadn't moved my hand away. "Couldn't, maybe?" There was a pause. Neither of us spoke, but the air was thick with something I hadn't expected, something electric and patient, simmering under polite civility. My pulse beat against my ribs, loud in the quiet room. I could feel her presence everywhere, in the soft sound of her breathing, in the subtle sway of her hair as she turned to watch me, in the way the light caught her profile and made every line of her face glow. "You belong here tonight," she whispered again, leaning just a fraction closer, so close I could feel the heat radiating from her. My chest tightened. I swallowed, trying to seem composed, but my hands betrayed me, curling loosely around the counter. She noticed, of course. She always noticed. I wanted to speak, to protest, or maybe to laugh at my own weakness, but no words came. Just the low thrum of awareness that she was near, that her nearness was intoxicating. I could feel the tension in her fingers, the subtle brush of her wrist against mine, like a promise without words, like an invitation written in small, careful gestures. The room felt smaller suddenly, the soft hum of the refrigerator, and the ticking clock loud in the charged quiet. My gaze lingered on hers, memorizing the curve of her lips, the way her eyes softened when they met mine, the faint, almost imperceptible tremble that betrayed her composure. Then, just as I thought I could hold the tension no longer, the sudden click of the front door opening outside made both of us flinch. She set her mug down and stretched just a fraction too close to reach for the sugar, and I caught the faint scent of her, vanilla, wood smoke, something uniquely her, floating in the air around me. I shouldn't have noticed. I shouldn't have leaned in just a little, letting my fingers brush against hers. But I did. Every nerve in me alert. Her laugh, soft and low, made my chest thrum. "You always get quiet when you're thinking too hard," she said. Not a tease exactly, but a careful observation that felt intimate. I looked up, caught her eyes, and for a moment I wanted to tell her everything, about the nights I'd spent imagining this, about the ache I hadn't understood until now, but I didn't. She's been through things, I realized. I saw it in the way she tensed when a memory flickered behind her eyes, the slight dip of her shoulders when she thought I wasn't watching. Divorced, I guessed, maybe a child grown and gone. A life lived with care and loss, moments of love and regret tucked neatly behind her smile. She carried it lightly, but I could feel it. "I wasn't always like this," she murmured suddenly, almost to herself. She shifted, and her arm brushed my shoulder. Just a whisper of contact, but it made me stiffen, swallow hard, and shift closer without thinking. "I used to rush, to throw myself into things, until I learned patience the hard way." I nodded, though I didn't know if she could see it in my face. I understood, in a way that surprised me. Patience, caution, restraint. And yet here she was, inches away, daring me to notice, daring me to respond. It was risky. Socially, morally, practically. I was 20, she was in her 40s. Any forward thought about us, it had to be quiet, private. It had to exist only in these charged, stolen moments, where every gesture, every glance, every brush of her hand against mine spoke louder than words. I caught her watching me once, too long, just enough to make my skin prickle. Then she pulled back, just a fraction, as if reminding herself, and me, that boundaries existed. But she lingered, still close enough that I could hear the faint rise and fall of her breath, the warmth of her arm against mine when she reached past to grab the coffee. I wanted to tell her she didn't have to hold back. I wanted to reach for her hand, even as my mind whispered caution. Instead, I let a slow smile form, and she noticed. Her lips curved, faint, subtle, but enough. Enough to charge the air between us so thickly I could almost taste it. For a long moment, we just stood there, unspoken, tethered by a tension that felt fragile yet inevitable. And in that silence, every hesitation, every guarded heartbeat, every shadow of longing felt, shared doubt. I was reaching for the sugar when my phone buzzed sharply on the counter, jolting me. The screen lit up with a message from a friend. "Still coming over?" My chest tightened, not from the message itself, but because it reminded me how fragile this moment was, how easily it could be exposed. She leaned in just then, brushing my shoulder lightly as she reached for the cream. Her fingers lingered for a heartbeat longer than necessary. I swallowed hard, aware of how close she was, how my hand trembled when I set the mug down. Our eyes met, and in the quiet between us, the air thickened, charged with something neither of us could, or wanted to, name. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, almost a whisper. Her face was inches from mine, and I caught the faint scent of her perfume, something warm and slightly floral. I nodded, though my voice had abandoned me. She noticed. Of course she noticed. A laugh from the hallway froze us both. I cursed softly under my breath. My friend wasn't coming in, just passing by, but the interruption was enough to snap us back. She stepped slightly back, but only slightly. The pull remained. It was magnetic, undeniable. I wanted to lean in, to close the space between us, to see if her lips would part like I imagined. But hesitation rooted me. Guilt flickered in my chest. This felt forbidden, precarious, and yet so right. Every rational thought battled against desire, and every stolen glance and lingering brush of her fingers only made it worse. Her hand brushed mine again, this time against the counter, lightly, intentionally. My fingers twitched, reaching for hers without realizing it. Our breaths mingled in the tight space between us, quickening. Heartbeats that felt far too loud, echoing in the quiet room. She tilted her head just slightly, her eyes searching mine, and I caught a flicker of vulnerability behind the confident mask she wore so well. "I shouldn't," I started, but she cut me off, shaking her head faintly, lips curving in a slow, knowing smile. The words died somewhere between my chest and the air. She wasn't letting me speak, not because she wouldn't, but because she didn't have to. Every instinct I had screamed to close the gap, but every lesson, every worry whispered restraint. Who would understand? What would anyone think if they knew? And yet, in that moment, we weren't thinking about anyone else. Our faces were so close I could feel the warmth radiating from her, smelled the subtle mix of jasmine and vanilla. Her hand rested lightly on mine, and the tension between us tightened like a drawn string, ready to snap. My fingers twitched toward hers, our forearms almost touching. Then, as if the universe had agreed to keep us suspended on this fragile precipice, we didn't move. We didn't pull back either. She lingered closer than ever, her breath brushing my cheek, and I could feel the quiet force of her presence drawing me in, irreversibly. And in that charged silence, I realized something undeniable. No matter how hard we tried, we weren't walking away tonight. Not from each other. The room felt smaller than ever, every shadow, every ray of light magnifying the space between us. I couldn't breathe without noticing her. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed, but her posture was betraying her calm. Shoulders taut, chest rising just slightly faster than mine. "I can't stop thinking about you," I blurted before I could catch myself. The words hung in the air, heavier than I'd imagined, almost too real. Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second, then softened, and my stomach flipped. "You shouldn't," she whispered, but the sharp intake of her breath betrayed her own restraint. She reached a hand up, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face, and her fingers lingered against my jaw longer than necessary. I wanted to close the gap, wanted to taste the warmth of her skin, but my mind still whispered caution. Her closeness pressed against me, literally, the curve of her hip grazing mine as she shifted. I could feel the subtle heat radiating off her, the soft brush of her sleeve against my arm. My fingers twitched as if responding on their own. Every instinct in me was screaming, yet I froze, caught between wanting and hesitation. I can't," she said again, this time louder, with the slightest quiver at the edge of her words. Her hand traced a line down my forearm as if to anchor herself, or maybe me. My heart was hammering. Every breath was synchronized, unspoken, charged. I leaned just slightly, just enough that our faces were almost touching, my voice low, raw. "I don't want to stop. Not if you don't." The words trembled out of me, vulnerable in a way I hadn't meant to be. She swallowed, eyes flicking to my lips and back to mine, lips parting slightly, and the air between us thickened, heavy with almost confessions. The tension wasn't just desire. It was fear, fear of how far we could go, fear of the consequences. And it was jealousy, too, though either of us spoke the word. A simple touch could ignite it, a glance, a hesitation. I wanted her entirely, but I wanted her whole, without regret, without ruin. Her hand slid from my jaw to the back of my neck, just barely grazing, just enough to pull me a fraction closer. I could feel her pulse under my fingertips, fast and steady, alive. Every sound in the room amplified, the quiet hum of the fridge, the faint ticking of the clock, our unsteady breathing. Then she leaned just a fraction more, closer than ever, her lips almost brushing mine. My hand itched to cup her face, to tilt her closer, to close that final fraction of space. And in that fragile, heart-stopping moment, she whispered, almost too softly to be heard, "Tonight, you're mine." The words hung there, electric, undeniable, and I realized there was no turning back. Not from her. Not from what had been building between us. Then, the door creaked. The moment stretched, heavy and fragile, after the door creaked. My heart was still pounding from the near kiss when her phone vibrated sharply on the counter. She glanced at it, then froze. A text, one I hadn't expected. "I didn't want you to find out like this," she murmured, almost to herself. Her fingers brushed mine as she picked up the phone, lingering longer than needed, and I felt a jolt. "What is it?" I asked softly, though part of me already feared the answer. She hesitated, biting her lip, and the smallest tremor ran through her hand. She didn't answer immediately, and I realized I didn't just want to know the words. I wanted to watch how she handled them, the way she shifted her weight, the subtle tightening of her shoulders. Finally, she whispered, "Someone's been watching. Listening. You weren't supposed to know." Her voice was low, tinged with something I hadn't heard before, fear wrapped in guilt. I stepped closer, almost instinctively, and she didn't move away, not completely. But the space between us was different now, charged with caution and a new vulnerability. My hand hovered near hers, trembling slightly, the air between us thick and electric. "I don't understand," I said. My throat was tight, my pulse racing, not just from desire, but from the sudden risk she had revealed. Her eyes flicked toward mine, dark and unreadable, then back to the phone. "I wanted it to be just us. Safe. Private. I didn't want anyone to complicate this." Her hand brushed against my arm as she shifted closer to block the screen from view. The contact was accidental, or maybe not, but it sent another shiver up my spine. I wanted to reach for her hand, to steady her, to claim some comfort in the chaos. Instead, I froze for a second, letting her proximity speak for us. The warmth of her shoulder against mine, the faint pressure of her hip brushing against me as she shifted, all of it said more than words could. "I don't care who's watching," I murmured, letting my fingers graze hers ever so slightly. "I'm here." I'm not going anywhere. Her lips parted slightly, her chest rising and falling faster, and she leaned just a fraction closer than before. There was a flicker of hesitation, the tiniest breathless pause before she drew back, eyes searching mine like she was measuring if it was worth the risk. I can't promise it'll be easy, she said finally, voice barely audible, but the tremor in her hands betrayed the desire she tried to hide. She shifted again, just close enough that our thighs brushed, a spark of heat in the quiet room. I swallowed, heart hammering, and stepped closer too. The tension between us was undeniable, dangerous, intoxicating, inevitable. I don't care about easy, I said softly, letting my hand hover near hers, daring to bridge the gap. I care about you. About this. Her eyes locked onto mine, searching, questioning, longing. And in that suspended silence, the decision was made, not fully voiced, but felt. We were stepping closer to the edge, and neither of us would turn away this time. The room seemed to shrink around us, every shadow, every glint of light sharpening the space between our bodies. I could feel her breath against my cheek, warm and uneven, her hand resting just above mine on the counter. The tension had stretched long enough. It demanded release, and neither of us could deny it any longer. I can't keep pretending, I whispered, voice low, rough with something I hadn't meant to show. Her eyes flickered to mine, wide, searching, then softened, and my chest tightened. She was trembling slightly, not from fear, I realized, but from wanting, from the weight of it all. She stepped closer, just enough that her hip brushed mine. My fingers itched to move, to find her hand, to trace the line of her arm, but I hesitated, waiting, letting her guide the moment. Her gaze dropped to my lips, then back to my eyes, and I saw the same storm there I felt in myself. Desire tangled with fear, longing tangled with regret. Are you sure? She murmured, almost afraid to let the words escape. Her lips hovered close enough that I could see the faint tremble, the soft catch of her breath. My hand hovered near her waist, a whisper away from contact, and every instinct in me shouted to close the distance. I've never been more sure of anything, I said, letting my voice drop, letting it carry the weight of every stolen glance, every lingering touch, every tension-filled pause that had led us here. She tilted her head slightly, a soft exhale escaping her lips, and leaned in just a fraction more. Our foreheads touched almost imperceptibly, her warmth seeping through, and I could feel her heart beating, fast and erratic, echoing my own. We were on the precipice, too close to turn back, too raw to pretend it didn't matter. Every hesitation, every doubt, melted into the electricity that pulsed between us. Her fingers brushed my hand, tentative, then firm, anchoring us. My thumb found the curve of her palm, our hands a quiet declaration, a tether that said what words could not. I drew in a slow breath, letting it ground me, letting it say, I'm here. I choose this. Her lips were almost against mine now, the space between us charged, taut, impossible to ignore. She hesitated, just for a heartbeat, then whispered against my mouth. Tonight. I'm yours. And I answered with the only truth that mattered. I didn't pull back. We didn't rush. There was no perfect choreography, no cinematic flourish, just the raw, human closeness of two people who had waited too long to deny what they felt. Bodies leaned, hands lingered, breaths mingled. We understood each other fully in that moment, every fear, every hesitation, every unspoken longing. The outside world didn't exist. The age gap, the consequences, the warnings, they all fell away in the quiet gravity of us. For the first time, I felt it clearly, desire didn't have to be reckless, it could be chosen. And this tangled, human, imperfect closeness, was ours. The quiet settled around us like a soft blanket. The tension that had held us taut for weeks, for months, now ebbed into something warmer, something steadier. We sat side by side on the couch, knees nearly touching, hands intertwined, and the world outside felt distant, irrelevant. Her fingers wove into mine naturally, each touch deliberate yet effortless. I could feel the subtle warmth of her hand, the gentle pressure of her thumb against mine, a rhythm that said more than words ever could. She leaned her head against my shoulder, and I rested mine lightly against hers, letting the moment stretch, letting it be enough. You feel different now, I murmured, voice low, hesitant. Not in a questioning way, but in that fragile way we speak when something new and precious is taking root. She smiled, faint, almost shy, though her eyes held that familiar confidence. I feel like I can just be here, she whispered, her breath brushing my cheek. With you. Without overthinking. The age gap, the risks, the doubts, they weren't erased, not really. But here, in this quiet space, they didn't matter. What mattered was the closeness, the honesty, the choice we'd made to be present, to be together, to let desire coexist with respect and care. I brushed a stray strand of hair from her face, feeling the softness, the vulnerability, the unspoken trust. She leaned into the gesture, letting her eyes close for a brief second, and I realized how fully she was letting herself exist in this shared moment. We didn't need words to fill the space. Every glance, every subtle squeeze of her hand, every quiet exhale between us said what mattered. The world could wait. Work, judgment, time, they could all wait. Right now, it was just us. I tilted my head, brushing my lips briefly against her forehead. A soft, intimate kiss that carried gratitude, longing, and the quiet promise of more. She hummed softly, a small, content sound, and pressed closer, as if answering a question I hadn't asked aloud. The warmth lingered, seeping into my chest. I could feel the rise and fall of her breathing, the gentle rhythm of her pulse against mine, and I understood something I hadn't fully grasped before. Love, desire, connection, they didn't have to be perfect. They just had to be real. For the first time in a long while, the silence wasn't tense, it was comforting. The room didn't feel small, it felt intimate. The minutes passed unnoticed, each one a quiet testament to trust, choice, and the human messiness of longing finally met. She tightened her grip on my hand, just enough to anchor us both. I smiled, finally letting myself relax fully. Together, in this imperfect, beautiful moment, we were exactly where we needed to be. And as the soft light of evening stretched across the room, I realized this was only the beginning, not of a story, but of us. Did you enjoy the story? What kind of stories would you like to hear next?